A great role-playing game is something that should be cherished, and in many cases, if it is really good, savored over the course of time. It is an experience that will stick with you for the rest of your life, and you will defend that game when provoked, sometimes maybe even irrationally, because it is so deeply ingrained in your mind as being something special. Exactly why a game is special to each of us is certainly only understood on a personal level, but in this video, I will tell you the 5 things that, for me anyway, make a great role-playing game. Any RPG with these characteristics is likely worth playing, so let's get started. Number 5. Memorable quests and story. Okay, so this is kind of cheating, but it is really all one thing, and that is simply really good writing. Writers that love the source material and have time to develop engaging quests that take us across the land, under the sea, or into a cavern can turn what seem to be mundane tasks into our favorite quests. Sometimes it is the most mundane sounding quests that turn out to be the most memorable. Helping an NPC that wants you to investigate strange lights turning into an awesome quest to stop a Daedric god from being summoned, or inspecting the haunted wing of a castle to then end up in Pelagius's mind are both extremely memorable quests that stand out over the course of my hundreds of hours with Skyrim. These quests help expand the lore of the game but can also help to advance the main story as well. Enough memorable quests are even, in some cases, good enough to prop up a main storyline that doesn't quite hit the mark with the player. Skyrim and Fallout 4 could, for some players, be an example of this. The moment-to-moment quests being so interesting can be detrimental to a much larger narrative that, if it doesn't connect with the player, could leave the player feeling disappointed at the end of a game they spent hundreds of hours playing. It also works the other way, in that some players, like myself, like to do the main story quest line so that I can get to what I really enjoy, and those are the smaller, more contained quests with great dialogue, exploration, characters, story, and in most cases, good loot at the end. Either way, a great RPG will have either dozens of memorable quests or one really, really good main story. Some, on a rare occasion, will have both. Number 4. Notable characters. Now, this goes hand in hand with memorable quests, because characters in many cases make the quest memorable. A wooden NPC telling you to go there and get that thing isn't really memorable at all. In fact, in my opinion, that is why it is so hard to have any real investment in Fallout 76. Terminals, robots, and holotapes don't provide you with a memorable experience in the same way a dynamic NPC, with good writing and voice acting, and maybe even accompanying you on a quest, would do. The very best role-playing games have at least several NPCs that you will forever remember. Whether it be Philip Stranger, also known as the Bloody Baron from The Witcher 3, or Jarl Balgruuf of Whiterun in Skyrim, you instantly remember that character from the game and they elicit emotions from the player. It doesn't have to be positive emotions either. A truly stirring and memorable villain is sometimes even better, like Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII or Gaunter O'Dim from The Witcher 3's expansion DLC Hearts of Stone. Their performances in their respective games outshine the quests and certainly other villains before them. Regardless on your stance about whether truly notable characters should be heroes or villains, if you remember them after a playthrough and they evoke any kind of emotion, then the game did its job. Number 3. Emergent gameplay or combat. Some people will tell you that gameplay is king. It is the mantra Nintendo has used since, well, basically forever. It's true that quests and characters can be amazing, but if the gameplay is terrible or too restrictive, many players will simply move on to another game. However, when the player is presented with a variety of playstyles for any encounter, it makes the moment-to-moment gameplay truly shine. Though Zelda Breath of the Wild isn't really a traditional role-playing game, it is right there on the edge. Breath of the Wild's true hook was exploration, but the dozens of ways to approach any task, whether it be terrain traversal or combat, meant that it allowed for players to have a truly emergent gameplay experience. Even Skyrim or Fallout, with the large variety of character builds and weapons, allowed for the player to choose their own unique way to approach situations. While they may not have allowed for the player to approach from any angle like Breath of the Wild, within the constraints of the environment there were plenty of options available. Combat is really what players spend most of their time engaged in with just about every game out there. Since you will spend so much time engaged in this manner, a truly great role-playing game will have numerous combat and character build options. If, as in Skyrim's case, the combat isn't amazing, The character build and variety of weapons and magic is varied enough that the player can choose a playstyle unique to them. This can also add tremendously to the replay value of the game, as games with more streamlined combat options force the player into a static playstyle. Number 2. Great music. If there's one thing that may stick with players longer than anything else about a game, it is a great soundtrack. It is the one part of the game that you can also take with you and enjoy time and again at your leisure. Music has an innate ability to evoke both emotion and nostalgia. Hearing the score to a game you played over a decade ago, or longer, can bring back the good feelings and memories associated with that game. I would even go so far as to say that unmemorable music can take a game down a notch from being great to just good. On the other hand, great music can elevate a game that is just good to something that is great. It seems odd to say that, since the player has no part in the music itself, but it becomes so ingrained in the experience you have over the course of dozens or hundreds of hours that you will be just as familiar with the musical score as you will be with your character, the land, or the story, if not more. In an RPG, I would argue that the soundtrack is even more important than in most other genres. By their nature, RPGs last dozens of hours, so a great score will include equally as much music. Further, the music that the player consistently hears, such as combat themes, has to be extremely good, since it is heard repeatedly over the course of the playthrough. If you can play a game for over 100 hours and not get tired of hearing the combat music, then you know it is probably a pretty good score. On the other hand, if the combat theme isn't good, and this extends to overworld themes as well, then many players are forced to quit simply because they are tired of hearing the same annoying track over and over. However, music is narrowly edged out by one last thing that can make a great role-playing game. Number 1. Meaningful exploration. I added a qualifier here because it is incredibly important. A game with exploration just for the sake of exploration isn't going to be worth experiencing. Simply providing a lot of space between point A and point B doesn't make it rewarding if there aren't two additional factors in play. The first is that there are other interesting things to do on the way to distract you. This is the part of your journey where things in the distance tug at the player to get them to veer off course, and in turn, those smaller interesting things make the journey more exciting. I can't tell you how many times on my way somewhere in Skyrim that I was distracted by a small cave in the distance, only to find myself exploring Dwemer ruins or a huge cave system for several hours, uncovering all kinds of new lore, materials, or gear. The second part is the end destination itself. After your long journey to get where you're going, there needs to be some kind of payoff. That could be a dungeon, the completion of a long quest with great dialogue and a compelling reward, another new quest line, or even just a really amazing view. As long as the player is rewarded for their time commitment to the quest or journey, the gameplay loop is satisfying and the player wants to continue and do it again. Playing The Witcher 3, Skyrim, or even the recent Fallout games all provide rewards for the player's time. Even if the player simply uncovers an interesting storyline or a new piece of lore, it is a worthwhile experience. Games that don't have this rewarding gameplay loop and feature an open world lose that sense of wonder and thus will likely not be great games. This is especially true for games where the method of terrain traversal isn't exciting. If the player has to walk everywhere and there's nothing to see or do between locations, the game becomes extremely boring no matter how exciting the final location proves to be. In that instance, you have small pockets of action or story padded out by long periods of nothing. Meaningful exploration truly ties all of the other components of a great role-playing game together. The quests, characters, combat, and music are all tied together when the game world is an amazing experience in and of itself. It becomes its own character, if you will. Before Skyrim was released, most Elder Scrolls lore made it sound like it was a snowy, mountainous, frozen tundra of a region. What we got instead was a game world with incredible variety and character while remaining true to the lore. The world of The Witcher 3, complete with a subworld in Skellige, provided so many interesting locations to explore that the mundane combat could be largely overlooked. Even Fallout 3 had something to see around every corner as you explored familiar monuments in a post-apocalyptic wasteland that just begged for you to see a little bit more. A great role-playing game can falter in many other categories and still remain great if there is a compelling and interesting world to explore. Pulling the player further into the game world results in leveling up their character, opening new quests, meeting new NPCs, fighting new enemies, or simply enjoying more amazing music. The next great role-playing game we see will likely be CD Projekt Red's Cyberpunk 2077, Obsidian's The Outer Worlds, and hopefully Bethesda's Starfield. Down the road we can expect to see The Elder Scrolls 6 and the next Dragon Age game, but both of those are likely many years away. So, what's the most important part of an RPG to you? Exploration? Combat? Something I didn't even mention? Let's discuss in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe, maybe click that bell icon, and as always, thank you so much for watching.